Human Rights Watch has called for states and citizens to resist the challenges of what it calls populist demagogues. In its annual report, the group described U.S. President Donald Trump's policies as racially divisive. But it welcomed the part played by the popular movements and legal challenges in countries including the U.S., Hungary and Poland in resisting government threats to human rights. The report warns that some countries have stepped back from championing human rights. The UK, because of its preoccupation with Brexit, for example, and some European countries influenced by xenophobic parties. It says that's left a vacuum, allowing mass atrocities to go unchecked in countries including Syria, Yemen, Myanmar and South Sudan. But it says a number of other countries have stepped in, highlighting the role of Canada, Belgium, Ireland and Luxembourg, and holding Saudi Arabia, for example, to account over its conduct in the war in Yemen. We can now speak to Kenneth Roth. He's the Executive Director of Human Rights Watch itself, joining us live from Paris. Thanks for speaking to us. You just launched this report a few hours ago. And what you've said is the past year shows that rights can be protected from the populist surge. The challenge now is to strengthen that defense. How do you strengthen the defense?
Well, I think as you pointed out, a year ago it seemed like the populists were unstoppable. Donald Trump had just entered the White House, and it seemed like there was this growing number of political leaders who were finding advantage in demonizing minorities and attacking human rights principles and in undermining democratic institutions. And frankly, the big news of the last year is the outpouring of resistance that we have seen. We've chosen to release the report in Paris because Emmanuel Macron epitomizes that resistance in the way that he led his electoral campaign by not trying to mimic the far right, but by openly confronting it and embracing democratic principles. We've seen this in the United States, where there's been an outpouring of popular rebellion, really, against Trump's excesses. And in some cases, it's been possible to mitigate them. We don't have a Muslim travel ban. Trump was not able to destroy Obamacare. Trump was not able to prevent transgender people from serving in the U.S. military. And we've seen similar resistance against Prime Minister Orban's so-called illiberal democracy in Hungary, against Poland's efforts to undermine the independent judiciary there, against Nicolas Maduro's efforts to undermine democracy in Venezuela. So it is possible to fight back. On the other hand, in places where there was no resistance, either because domestic resistance was suppressed or because the international community didn't care enough, the populists have really flourished. And we've seen that through, Erdogan's decimation of Turkey's democracy. We've seen it in President Sisi's destruction and crushing of civil society in Egypt. We've seen it, frankly, in the way the Saudi-led coalition has committed mass war crimes in Yemen, creating the largest humanitarian crisis in the world.
So you've singled out Trump's rhetoric. So you've singled out, for example, Trump's rhetoric. You've singled out authoritarianism in countries like Turkey and in Egypt. What is the biggest danger today to human rights, according to Human Rights Watch?
Well, obviously the populists themselves represent a danger because they feel that they can convince people that the rights of minorities don't matter. Even though once you let governments pick and choose rights, all of our rights are insecure, because it may be the vulnerable minority today whose rights are attacked, but tomorrow it's going to be the majority. The other real danger is that, in this void of leadership, we've seen some governments just, feel they have a green light to commit atrocities. That's in a sense what happened with the Burmese government's ethnic cleansing of 650,000 Rohingya Muslims. That's in a sense what the Saudi Crown Prince has been able to do in Yemen, where 7 million people face starvation and 1 million have suffered cholera. That's what we've seen, in Syria, where Putin and Assad continue to attack civilians and are besieging at this very moment 390,000 people in eastern Ghouta, just 10 kilometers away from Damascus, where they're desperate for food and medical care. So it's important to close this leadership void and for governments to grab the baton when they can and to step in and stop it. We've seen that it doesn't always take the superpower. Even in the absence of Donald Trump, even in the absence of the UK, Governments as small as the Netherlands or Liechtenstein or Iceland have taken important initiatives that have made a difference in places like Syria or the Philippines or Yemen.
And just briefly and finally, can you tell us how you would describe the state of human rights today?
I mean, this is obviously a dangerous moment because there is a real lack of leadership on human rights. But I think we've seen over the last year that, you know, when people do stand up and defend human rights and democratic principles, it's possible to curtail the advance of the populist. So in this dangerous moment, it's important not to despair, but to engage, because that kind of engagement can play an important role in defending the human rights principles that ultimately all of us need to flourish in our societies.
All right, Kenneth Roth, we thank you for speaking to us from Paris.